my name is Sam Brown, and I'm a senior athletic training student here at Emory Henry College. And I decided to research whether or not there are trends of injuries in Division III swimmers based off their distance or stroke. So I came to the idea of researching this because I've been swimming for the past 16 years. And in that time I've sustained multiple injuries myself as well as having watched a lot of my teammates sustain injuries, and I was curious if there was a relationship between the injuries that I was sustaining versus the injuries they were sustaining and and the differences in our training. So the subjects I used were the 19 female swimmers, Division III swimmers that attended school, and they all had various specialties. So here are my categories. I broke the swim team down first by which stroke each athlete specializes in, and those included butterfly, backstroke, breaststroke, freestyle, and individual medley, RIM. And then further broke it down by the distance in each stroke. So the sprint, which I classified, those are the power athletes, the ones who swim 50 or 100 yards per meters. Then mid-distance, which I classified as the 200 and 400 swimmers, and then the distance swimmers, which was anybody who swims a 500 or more. That could go up to the 1650 or mile. So my methods included a survey where I asked their age and how many years they've been competing. And I then asked them to define what they consider to be injuries since they've entered college here. And then I asked them if they'd had any previous surgeries for injuries that they may have sustained, because previous surgery could increase their pain in a specific area, and maybe to eliminate that in my research, as well as it could also increase risk of injury to it if there's still weakness. And then I went to the athletic training clinic in our King Center and looked at the injury records and cross-referenced what I had on my survey with the records and added anything that wasn't included in the surveys. Using the information on my survey, I compiled this lovely table where I sorted the athletes on the swim team by age, and then detailed what they classified as their primary stroke and distance, and then listed their injuries. I then further compiled this information, eliminating the subjects in general, and just went to my subject groups. So, I'm sorry, I failed to include that table in my presentation. So it started with sprint butterfly, then mid-distance butterfly, and so on to the strokes, and listed all of the general injuries in that category. I then created graphs using the numbers that I had from the second table, and got these results. I started by seeing if there were trends in the type of injury, overuse, or acute, based off their stroke. There was much higher prevalence of overuse injuries in freestyle. I do mainly attribute that to the fact that we had more freestyle swimmers than anything else. But otherwise found that there were really no specific trends here. But it did get a bit more interesting when I went to type of injury based off distance, because I found that there are a lot more acute injuries in sprinters, and then it sort of leveled out in mid-distance, and then there were a lot more overuse injuries in the distance swimmers, which I found interesting, but it was also part of my hypothesis, so maybe just because with power athletes like sprinters, I believe that they would be more subject to injuries like muscle strains. And then with your endurance athletes, injury like the continuous repetitive motion, which you get with all swimmers, but more so with distance swimmers, I would find injuries like biceps tendonitis. Then after I broke everything down based off the type of injury, I went and broke it down by the location of the injury. And so what I found doing that is that there were a higher prevalence in relation to how many athletes I had in each stroke of shoulder injuries in both butterfly and freestyle. What I didn't expect was the high prevalence of knee injuries in freestyle swimmers, which I found interesting and believe would require further research on that. And then there were a higher prevalence of hip and groin injuries in breaststrokers. I also broke down location of injury based off distance, but as there were very, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. The results were fairly unconclusive there, as well as they were with the type of injury and the stroke years. So, discussion. I already mentioned how the type of injury sort of, how there are more obvious injuries in distance and more acute injuries in sprint. Then, one of the problems I did have though is that biceps tendonitis is a very common injury among swimmers and did fall into almost every single one of my categories. So I almost don't believe that information should be relevant in this particular study. Some limitations I did have was my subject, or the number of subjects that I had. With only 19 swimmers, you really can't get as much relevant information as I would have liked because I broke it down into so many different groups. There were about 10 subject groups in all. I had, in my sprint freestyle group, I had 5 swimmers, which is good, but in everything else I only had maybe 1 or 2. For future research, I think it would be interesting to recreate what I tried to do here with a larger sample group, as well as, and then use that information to potentially create a prevention program that is athlete specific, based off what stroke or distance they may swim. That's it. Any questions?
It seems. Was there any research that kind of looked at the same thing? Because to me, this would kind of be.
I did have some previous research that, outlines specific injuries, but nothing that was stroke specific. There was there was a little bit on an injury referred to as breaststroke machine, just medial knee pain, but everything else was just sort of vague. Yes, D1 swimmers suffer from this problem. Not really, well, sprinters, freestyle sprinters in specific had this issue, and so that's what I was trying to do. That's it.
So your charts were basically looking at modes for these things. This is more descriptive. You didn't do any calculations for like prevalence ratios, odds ratios, anything like that, where you were looking at how many were uninjured versus not, so that it put it into terms like the number that, because I know you couldn't look at hours of training and those types of things, which would certainly play a role, but so you didn't look at any of the prevalence ratios that would tell us in comparison to not.
I did not think of that. Although I do believe that was another one of the limitations that I failed to mention, is that you can see there are 5 athletes up here that don't have injuries at all. So obviously that doesn't help with my research either.
Well, I think that does inform something.
Yeah.
That
This is
does
true.
inform, and that's where it's good a lot of times to get those ratios. When we look at prevalence statistics, we typically will get some of that in there. So that does actually inform quite a bit, actually.
Did you find any similarities between the ones that had no injuries? Were there any even ideas you could draw from that?
No. Looking at this, they fall into 4 different categories of people who don't have injuries. Like you have your sprint freestylers, sprint backstroke, sprint, or mid-distance breaststroke, and then sprint breaststroke. I suppose one of the few similarities I could spot is that 4 out of those 5 are sprinters, which is interesting. I have not noticed that, but I don't know, that does form. Any other questions?
So what do you plan to do? So what are your recommendations with this information now that we can say a little bit more definitively about distance and stroke type that there are?
Using this, since I did have such a small sample group, not much. That's why I would like to recreate it with more swimmers, and if there were more swimmers in this area, I probably would have, but like closest, no, we don't even have another D3 college with a swim team nearby. I was gonna say King
close.
College, but they're D2, so
Why should that make a difference, huh?
it could, just level of training. Granted, we obviously train at a higher level than they do because we do them like 4 times. But on the point,
Y'all train a lot.
You do train a
High school
lot.
athletes or any just group swim teams that are in the area. There's a lot of that around here.
yeah,
And I
so
wouldn't say you
I
can't do
could
anything with
expand
it.
it to include just swimmers in general and just see what results I could get out of that.
I wouldn't say you can't do anything with this. I think that this tells you there's something else maybe you need to dig into.
Yeah, I'm not saying I
So I
can't do
think
anything,
that
but I'm just
that's
saying I
always
would
good.
like to do more research before I make suggestions. Based off the results that I got.
Hope you have enough.
Oh,
So do you think it'd be interesting to look at like, because you asked how long they swam, but did you think about maybe asking if they play other sports too and before like college? Maybe that'd be interesting.
I did that. For me, swimming is life. But based off the results on the survey that I got, the number, like, all of our athletes have been swimming for at least 6 years, anywhere from 6 to 17, I think was the range. So even if they have competed in other sports, it was when they were smaller.
Yeah.
But that would be a good question to